This video is powered by the pros at Pascal Air Plumbing and Electric. Arkansas owned, Arkansas operated. GoPascal.com.
SEC Mike now joins us here on the Morning Rush. Now, one of the things that you maybe don't know about Mike is he thinks KJ Jefferson is the number one returning SEC quarterback this year. Mike, you've watched a lot of KJ the last few seasons. What to you makes KJ potentially the best QB in the Southeastern Conference this year?
Yeah. Hey, Ty, thanks for having me. With KJ, it's a couple things, but he's like a tank back there. I mean, he really is the toughest version of a quarterback in the SEC, so I love that. And deep ball accuracy. I mean, he's incredible pushing that ball down the field. That combination just makes him such a unique player to have to defend, and it doesn't seem to matter who his receivers are. They get wild production out of it. And, this is not necessarily KJ related, but when you have someone lining up next to you like Rocket Sanders, that puts a ton of pressure off of KJ's shoulders, and defenses have to honor that running game. So that combination, I think, is lining up for another elite season for KJ Jefferson.
Mike, on that note, with the duo you just mentioned, I think most people would say that's the best quarterback-running back duo in the Southeastern Conference. Where do you think that ranks in the country?
When you hear top quarterbacks, obviously the guy from North Carolina, Drake May, but I don't know that he's got a really good running back next to him. It's got to be up there, even though I think, Quinshaw Juck he's a heck of a running back at Ole Miss, but certainly Jackson Dart, he's no KJ Jefferson, so they're miles away. It's got to be right up there, man, with one of the best combos in the country this coming season, which if I'm a Razorback fan, I'm pretty fired up about heading into the season.
I mean, you just think about this new wave, and the wave you just came through, which was really good with Bryce Young and Will Levis and Anthony Richardson, just to name a few at quarterback. I think that's been the difference, Michael, is you've seen, the SEC kind of fell off in some people's estimates for a few years. I think it was the quality of the quarterback play. You've seen a return to that, and I think that's why maybe the top 5 or 6 teams are maybe a little more respectable top to bottom this last couple of years than what it's been in recent years. Would you agree with that, or do you have a different take?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Because Georgia, I mean, heck, they didn't play at a walk-on, and they're winning the national championship. So maybe we don't put as much importance on the quarterback, but of course they're an outlier because they've got so much elite talent. But yeah, you may be on to something, because I think it was 2014, 2015, the SEC went through a ton of great quarterbacks, and it did take a dip there for a while. But speaking of a dip, it sounds like at Alabama they're not happy with either quarterback. So latest rumor is they're going to try to add a quarterback from Miami, Tyler Van Dyke, who I don't even think he's that good of a player, to be honest with you. So again, more good news, I would think, if I'm an Arkansas fan, is Alabama is seemingly very unhappy with what they have to work with following Bryce Young, likely to be the top pick in the upcoming draft.
So if you've got KJ as your top quarterback in the SEC, who do you like behind him? Is it Spencer Rattler, or you got some other? Who do you like besides KJ Jefferson across the landscape of the SEC?
I'd say number 2 is probably Jaden Daniels. And even though, he was somewhat up and down for LSU last season, but I think going into a second year in your system is always potentially setting you up to just kind of take that next level. And I think he's got all the talent in the world, so you got to put him there. Spencer Rattler, maybe. I mean, if he plays like he did against Tennessee and Clemson, yeah, we'll throw him into the conversation. But we're, far too often he's a little bit inconsistent for me to put him up with that class. I like Will Rogers at Mississippi State, but again, he doesn't have near the mobility of a KJ Jefferson or a Jaden Daniels. I'm hearing good things about Jackson Dart. I think he can take that next step, but not a lot of big-name quarterbacks in the SEC returning. I have to imagine, though, after seeing him on Saturday, Carson Beck, who they've not yet named the starter at Georgia, but he will be. I think he's primed for a huge year with all the weapons he's got to work with.
Yeah, Brock Bauer is probably the most notable of those weapons. You mentioned Beck. That's one of the questions I asked Tommy yesterday is that Georgia train going to keep on chugging with the new regime at quarterback? I mean, do you see them slowing down? I think the closest point differential they have on the betting lines right now is in Knoxville at 7.5. Do you see Georgia being challenged in the SEC East or really this season?
Well, Ty, I don't know if you've seen their schedule, but they're basically playing an FCS level schedule here outside of their SEC opponents, obviously. So, I mean, they're going to cruise in the non-conference. And, yeah, I mean, some of their tougher games, quote unquote, on the road at Auburn. They're in year one rebuild. Florida, which they're in a rebuild. You nailed it. Tennessee is the only one that I think conceivably gives them a challenge. And we saw last year when Tennessee gave them a challenge, Tennessee came into that game hyped up as the number one team in the country. And that was all the disrespect Georgia needed to just put a whooping on them. I do think Ole Miss, that's a potential trap game here because that's the week before Tennessee. We'll see how good Ole Miss is. That's the only other one possibly. Kentucky plays Georgia tight from time to time. But, again, that's how pathetic the schedule is. I'm trying to say Kentucky, which is in Athens, maybe their third toughest game. This is a ridiculously easy schedule. They're going to go undefeated. That doesn't guarantee they're going to win the national championship again, but I can't see a loss on their schedule.
I thought they're going to lose in Knoxville this season. We'll see if it ends up coming to fruition. I know you'd love that. By the way, we're talking with Michael Bratton, that SEC podcast. Mike, you mentioned Alabama's issues at quarterback. Bryce Young either going to be probably first or second pick in the upcoming NFL draft. Is the Hoover Dam cracking a little bit? I know we say that from time to time about Nick Saban, but they haven't won a national championship since 2019. Are you starting to see some deficiencies within that football program, not just this year, but the last couple of years?
Not only cracked, it's leaking pretty heavily, if you ask me. And the fact that, oh, man, it was Pete Golding. It was all his fault. It was all Bill O'Brien's fault. You go back and watch that LSU game from last year. Critical play, game-defining play, right out of a timeout. Alabama's got 12 men on the field. And there's just penalty after penalty, particularly on the road. They should have lost to Texas last year. Texas wasn't any good. Texas A&M, god-awful. They were the worst team in the West. Texas A&M had them in Tuscaloosa. All they had to do was score. They would have won that football game, and Jimbo Fisher called a fade route that had no chance. I mean, Alabama, yes, they're still elite. I'm not. You can't totally discount them. I'm not crazy, and I do think Nick Saban's the best coach of all time. But they have taken a step back, and the defense is not elite anymore in Tuscaloosa. Like I said, they've had to go to the portal to add running backs, receivers, offensive line. It certainly seems like development is also an issue in Tuscaloosa for whatever reason. So, yeah, I'm right there with you. I think I don't even consider them the favorite to win the West coming up.
Wow.
Wow. So who would you consider the favorite? LSU?
Right now, I think it's got to be LSU with all their returning. And, one thing people overlook, their best defensive lineman, Mason Smith, who everybody down there says is the best player on the team. Yeah. They lost him in the season opener against Florida State. So now he's coming back as well. Harold Perkins emerged as maybe the best linebacker in college football. I mean, they have got some studs on both sides of the ball at LSU. They're the team to beat in the West right now, I think.
Yeah, I'm glad Perkins could do that, could establish that against the Razorbacks last year on that miserably cold day. As he kind of foiled a lot of players. I don't know. I think he maybe 5 by now. But I want to go back to what you're talking about with Alabama because it is fascinating maybe to see the fall of a dynasty. But you always wonder why. You look back and you wonder why it happened. Is this a matter of LSU or is this a matter of Alabama has retreated and they're not working at the same level, they're not as efficient, or is the NIL and the portal and all that close the gap and help everybody catch up? Is it Alabama falling backwards, or everybody else catching up to Alabama at this point?
Well, I think it's a combination of both, but I think one thing that has been critical, and I understand why they did it, because they've had some great quarterbacks and they've had some great receivers come through there. But I think they've lost a little bit of that edge. They lost some of that toughness. Alabama used to be a team that would bludgeon you, that, the classic, they'll run on you when the defense knows it's coming. They can't do that anymore. They're more of a spread. They're more of a finesse. When you look at the team there in Athens, that's exactly their identity. They bludgeon you. They run on you when you know it's coming, and you can't stop it. Alabama has just lost that for whatever reason, and I don't know if it was Scott Cochran leaving, their famed strength and conditioning coach who jumped to Georgia. Maybe that was part of it. But, really, I think Nick Saban, the defense, go back to, I think the most stunning Alabama game under Nick Saban, I can't remember the year, but it was about 4 or 5 years ago when Trevor Lawrence, as a true freshman, just carved up that defense. He scored over 40 points in a national championship game. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was stunning to me. And, yes, Alabama did bounce back during the COVID year and won a title, but I don't know. The defense has just not been the same, and we just saw it last year too. Tennessee scored 50-plus on them, and there's not a single player on Tennessee's roster, I don't believe, that Nick Saban would have taken over one of his own, yet they couldn't slow down that offense to save their life.
For the layman, it's easy to look from the outside and just say, well, the fire's not. I mean, fires can't burn white hot, intense the way Saban has done for 15 years forever. And I think, it's a reasonable question to wonder, is he as intense and white hot with his fire to win the national championship and to dominate the way he once was? And I don't know that you can answer that unless you're on the inside, but I think it's a reasonable question to ask from the outside.
Right, and all we've heard from Nick Saban about last year's team was how much he liked it, the leadership. Will Anderson, he said many times, maybe the best leader he's ever been around. Bryce Young, I mean, you certainly cannot pick basically anything apart about his game. We're talking elite players. Yet again, there are multiple games they lost, and they're having 15, 16, 17 penalties in multiple games. This is a lack of coaching and discipline in my mind.
We're talking about coaching. Mike, last question before we let you go. You asked me earlier this week about Coach Pittman hires, and I want to redirect that to you. What do you think about the hiring of Travis Williams and Dan Enos as Arkansas enters year 4 under Sam Pittman?
Well, I certainly think that Dan Enos will be highly successful this season, but again, that is in large part because I really do believe, Todd, that the players matter more than the coaches. And that's certainly, whenever I say that, some people get up in arms and that's suggesting that I think coaching is irrelevant. That's not true. But I'll tell you, it's a lot easier to coach offensive football when you got KJ Jefferson and Rocket Sanders right there to work with. So I think Arkansas will be fine this year. My question for Dan Enos and that offense will be when those players are no longer in Fayetteville. But as far as Travis Williams, I loved Barry Odom, and I thought he won Arkansas several games, including probably the biggest wins of the Sam Pittman era. I think of that Texas game. I think of some Ole Miss games. Those were won in large part to Barry Odom and his defensive game plan. But at the same time, you have to keep it real. What he was doing was not working last year. And maybe that was because of injuries and lack of depth. But that's why I love Travis Williams' hire, because knowing him from his time at Central Florida and Auburn, he is going to be one of the best recruiters in the SEC. He's already bringing in that talent to shore up the defense. And they didn't just hire him because he knows how to recruit. He doesn't know how to coach a lick. If you look at efficiency at Central Florida, his defenses, I believe, were top 25 the last 2 years. So, I mean, you're getting a quality assistant all around, and bringing in Marcus Woodson, another guy. I know you guys know all about that, but to fix this pass defense, I think that was a move Sam Pittman had to make.
Get analysis of every play, prop, and point at BetOnline. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to sign up and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Be sure to use our promo code BELIEVE to receive your bonus. That's BLEAV. BetOnline.ag, where the game starts.